Welcome to our first podcast, Compliance Chronicles. The aim of the podcast is to basically break away from the rigid norms of compliance, the boardroom type scenarios of conversations, and have more informal chats around all things related to compliance. So I'm one of your hosts, Alex. Most people in the compliance space will know me. Been in the compliance sector function for many years now as either head of compliance, chief compliance officer, or a consultant and trainer. And I'm joined by...
My name's Ray. I am the co-host and I'm thrilled to be here. And my background is financial crime. So I'm a financial crime expert and also an accredited AML, anti-money laundering trainer. Been in the industry for over a decade. I've had the fortunate experience of being involved in both the regulation, government and industry side of things. And yeah, my aim alongside Alex is to bring into the space conversations that are challenging, conversations that are ones that are usually had in a boardroom or the back of a conference space, into a more accessible, flexible, and hopefully fun environment for you guys to listen and watch.
See, I told Ray before that he's got to cut down his intro, so anybody that's met Ray knows that he's got a ton of experience. He's for me, he's the go-to expert. I use him for everything that goes relates to anything AML or general compliance, really. But his intro, whenever he meets people, is super long. So I always tell Ray, try and cut it down, mainly because it puts me in a shadow, because no one can match your experience when it comes to most things compliance, but specifically AML, financial crime. You've been around the block. For someone that's young, you've been around the block.
I'm probably younger than or older than I look, and I thought I did a good job in
You did.
bringing down that intro. Usually it's about 3.5 minutes long, and would have taken us through to the end of the podcast. So I thought I did a good job.
No, you did. You cut it down, and that's exactly it. So the whole aim of the Compliance Chronicles is, over the next few months, we've got quite a few good guests lined up, not all from a compliance background. So even though we will talk about compliance matters, because we're realistic, compliance isn't the sexiest subject in the world, but we want to talk about things in a way that the conversations that we have when we're over a coffee or in informal environments with our colleagues, and we want to have those conversations. And I think most people know that I write a lot of articles. You've written a lot of articles over the last few years, and the feedback that's been coming is you should do it as a podcast, because it's difficult to read some of them longer articles. I know the last one I wrote was incredibly time consuming, not just for me to write, but for people to read. So having the podcast will hopefully cater to those people that want to just listen on the go, and if they can tolerate our voices, obviously, for 30 to 60 minutes at a time, then this will tick that box. Yeah, that's the aim.
Exactly that, Alex. And I think whilst you say compliance isn't the sexiest topic, what I think compliance is at the forefront. It's challenging, and I think it can be something that is not only topical, practical, but also it can be engaging. And that's kind of what our aim is here, to bring you engaging conversations that are centered around compliance and the compliance space, whether it's talking about compliance topics or the impact of different things on compliance. I think that's where we are. And so our first question I think people might be asking is, why Compliance Chronicles as the name of our podcast?
Yeah, I think we how long have we been discussing a name for the podcast? We've changed the name many times, because either a good name was taken, or because it didn't match with the... Compliance is one of those things. It's quite a formal subject, right? Quite a high level subject, and we wanted to try and break away from that. So the idea of Chronicles was that there's stories. We want to tell stories. We want to take people on different journeys through the things that we faced, our colleagues face on a daily, weekly basis. So Chronicles just seemed like the perfect alignment to what we wanted to do. So we did have other names. I was really pushed for Diary of a CCO, but Ray urged me on the side of caution and said, maybe don't take that.
We had a good few names. We had ranging from Diary of a CCO to Everybody Hates Compliance.
Yeah.
But I think this is a good name. And like you're saying, I think within compliance, everyone has a story to tell, and a different story to tell, and a different perspective. And what we want to do is encapsulate those trends, those stories in each and every podcast that we deliver. So look forward to many of these. and looking forward to all the topics that we'll discuss, all the the guests that we will have on during the podcast that we do deliver.
Yeah. So should we get on to the first topic, first subject?
Yeah,
The first
yeah.
podcast?
Like with the names, we had loads of different discussions on kind of the very first podcast.
Yeah.
What's the topic going to be? We deliberated. We were potentially going to go for something more safe, more mainstream, should we say, around compliance. But you came up with a topic which was definitely left field, definitely had me questioning, definitely had me intrigued. But something that we don't often, and I don't think I've ever had a conversation around this with anybody in compliance. So I thought, why not? Let's go for this topic. So do you want me to give the topic, or do you want to
Go?
Yeah. So the topic that you wanted, or we will do for our third podcast, guys, is mental health in compliance. So, like I said to you, Alex, it's something I've never discussed in terms of mental health in compliance or on compliance. So, I guess the podcast listeners would want to know, actually, how is mental health relevant to compliance?
I think the first thing that you said there is probably the key part, right? You've never spoken about it. And I think that kind of hits the nail on the head of why I wanted to speak about it. Because it's a subject that we do talk about, but we talk about it in quite a flippant way in compliance. Like, I'm stressed at the moment. I'm overworked at the moment. I'm overwhelmed. I've got a lot going on. I'm looking forward to the weekend. I'm looking forward to a beer this evening. It's things that we indirectly speak about. And it's also, for me, it's a subject that's I'm not going to say close to my heart, but it's a subject that I'm passionate about, because mental health awareness and mental dysfunction awareness is something that is everyone's increasing their knowledge around it. Everyone's more aware of it. And from my perspective, the reason I wanted to touch on the compliance side of things is because I generally feel for my colleagues. I feel for you. I feel for the people that I work closely with, the businesses that we work closely with when we're doing training or audits or anyone that we from a consultancy perspective we work with. You can feel their strain, their stress. You can feel that there's struggles, and I think having that open conversation about what is the problem, what is the challenge, what do we do to help cope? Are we coping first of all, or are we pretending to cope? So that people can see that it is something you can talk about first of all, but then also hopefully get some ideas and some practical things that people can take away to use in everyday life. Because from the way I've seen things when it comes to mental health in compliance, it's such a weird thing to put together. But mental health and compliance, it's the same way mental health awareness around men's mental health has really grown, which is a great thing. And in compliance, there's so much there's so much fear in talking about mental health, not just in compliance, but in general perspectives. But specifically in compliance, there's so much fear around it because there's so much at stake, right? The amount of risk and responsibility that compliance professionals, more than I would say in many other departments, they face. So that's a really long answer, but that's kind of why I wanted that subject as the first subject, because it's something different, but also it's something, we've got to talk about it. We absolutely have to talk about it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I could probably a rhetorical question or a question back to myself. But then you mentioned that word stress. What is it about the compliance role, the compliance sector, or the area of compliance that causes such a high level of stress then, do you think?
It's the burden of risk that compliance professionals have on their shoulders. So in a lot of companies, there's this perception that something goes wrong, that C-level ownership, they're in the forefront, they're going to face the consequences, but it's not. It's the compliance department. It's the one department where you can do a great job and get very little recognition and reward, but you do a bad job and immediately, you're in the firing line. And the stress is heightened or not even the stress, that's maybe the wrong word. The pressure is heightened because it's not, it's a very selfless role. Everything you do within compliance is based on the protection of customers, the protection of your colleagues, other employees, the protection of the business, protection of the economy. It's a very selfless role. So when you get it wrong, when you make mistakes, when you fail at your job, let's call it what it is, when you fail at your job or your team fails at their job, the consequences are so severe, but the rewards are very low. And I think because of that, that's why I think that it's stress is just one side of things. I think it's the fear, anxiety, and these all amplify. And if they're not addressed quickly enough, they can become more severe. And I think that's why in compliance it's more, for me, it's more pressure than many other jobs, because, and also a lot of other jobs, a lot of other roles in the industries we work with. We look at financial sector, gambling sector, trading, all of those industries. You have many roles where you can make mistakes and kind of slip under the radar. It's like football, right? We both love football. You know, if you're a striker, you're an attacker, you make a mistake, kind of be forgotten about. You're a goalkeeper and you make a mistake, it leads to your team conceding. Everyone remembers it. You know, you can be dropped from the team. The stakes are much higher. But if you look at how many shots a striker will miss in comparison to how many goals a goalie will let in from a mistake, there's a massive, like, the strikers will make a lot more mistakes in a game.
Yeah, for sure.
But you can fly under the radar.
Yeah.
And for me, that's compliance to the goalkeepers. Essentially, goalkeepers and defenders. You make a mistake, it costs.
Are you saying that because I'm a striker? It's like you trying to.
You miss a lot. You miss a lot of shots if you shoot at all, because you don't normally pass or release it. You end up getting tackled before it even happens.
No, and I totally agree. And from my own personal experience, I think the stakes are really high, like you said, and I think there's a lot of fear there. And so I've worked in, like you said, in financial crime for over a decade, and currently in the current role as an MLRO in some of the work I do, and I have conversations with people around kind of developing them. I have an MLRO development program, and I have conversations about developing people into the role of an MLRO. And a lot of the fear is, a lot of it, the reservation is the fear, the fear of the responsibility of an MLRO. Not only the responsibility laid on by the company, but it's responsibility laid on by regulation or legislation.
But the fear of what? The fear of failure.
Fear of failure, or fear of getting it wrong. So what happens if in my role as an MLRO, I get something wrong? And what are the consequences? Not so much about, what are the consequences to me in my role, in my company, but actually what are the consequences to me as a person under the legislation, the regulation. And I think, like you mentioned, the scrutiny in compliance is often twofold, whereas, it's almost exclusive to compliance, where the pressures come from the business, but also the pressures come from regulation and legislation. So you're scrutinized double fold. And I think for me, that's where I see the stresses. That's where I see a lot of the reservations and a lot of the burden come from, in terms of you trying to please your company as well as please the regulator or regulation or legislator. And I think that's a big part of where the mental health aspect or mental health side of compliance is missed, is that continuous pressure. And it's almost like a counselor. So we've got to take on board, the problems of the company, but also take on board the problems or the challenges of the industry, and often the nation, because these regulations are laid down by whatever jurisdiction they are and the country they are. And for me, I think the biggest fear for me is not so much actually me getting it wrong. The fear for me is actually not identifying others getting things wrong. Yeah. So within compliance, when it comes to an audit, and people who are listening to the podcast may have been involved in regulatory assessments, whether it might be from the Financial Conduct Authority, from the UK Gambling Commission, or whatever regulator it is out there, who come and do a compliance assessment. And then our challenge is actually to identify when others have got it wrong before it comes to that assessment. And so for me, that's probably the biggest fear, not me not doing my job properly, but actually me identifying others who are not.
Yeah, but then if you miss something in your audit, is that your problem or is it their problem? Like, whose fault is it? Why? I understand. I feel the same as you, but it's their responsibility to get it right. We're there to check if they're getting it right, but it's their responsibility to know the laws and regulations as well.
I think you're right, but ultimately, how it is the buck stops with whoever it is in compliance, so head of compliance, MLRO, and the compliance professionals. The buck stops there. So when the failing happens in a different area of the business outside of compliance, but it impacts on compliance, ultimately compliance are held
Yeah.
accountable.
Yeah, because we had that conversation right a few weeks ago with, we see it across all of the companies that we work with, that they're so dependent on other departments doing their job that when those departments fail, it's still them. Like, they're in an audit and they're getting asked questions. Well, for example, why did this happen? And they genuinely didn't know the answer because, well, that sits with customer service, or it sits with our trading team or VIP team, whatever it is. And then you feel for them because you're asking them difficult questions. Yeah, I get what you mean. And I think, going back to what you were saying before about, the stresses and the pressures, I think it's also the abnormal things that have become normal. So like abnormal normalities. So if you look at like, how normal is it now that 24/7 you're on call? Like, it never used to happen, but 24/7 you're on call. And when I say you're on call, you're looking at your phone, like you're getting emails, you're getting messages 24/7. You never really switch off. Even the times when you think you're switching off, you're not, because you will quickly switch into work mode when that phone rings or you get an email. And I think it's those things that have become normal, the expectation, I would say, that if you're working in the compliance function, you have to be around. And I'm not talking just at senior level, because I think that comes with the territory. But for most people, even in the gambling industry, safer gambling professionals, AML professionals, they're around 24/7. You contact someone at 2 a.m. in the morning and say, this customer's just made a threat of self-harm. I need you to take action. They're there, whether they're meant to be working or not. And I think that's having a really bad impact on people's mental health, because let's take safer gambling as a specific example. I was talking to a couple of guys that I used to work with who I consider to be like experts in compliance and safer gambling, and we were having a chat around this same subject, funny enough. And one of them was talking about they used to be in safer gambling, and he was saying that one of the things that he likens working in safer gambling is building your own coffin. Those were his words. You're building your own coffin because you're working day and night, whether you like it or not, because it's an expectation. And if you don't do it, they know it's really easy to find someone else that is willing to do it on low pay. The problem gets worsened for them in safer gambling because it's such a niche role that when you work in safer gambling, some of the skills are transferable, but when you're applying for another job in another industry, because you've been working in safer gambling, it's hard for those other industries and sectors to see, well, how can I take those skills and use them in this job? So for those people that work in safer gambling, he said, yeah, building your own coffin. And it links into what you said, like being like a company seen it as a necessary evil. But he said that he's really struggled getting out of safer gambling and finding another opportunity. And it was only when he came to do other roles that opened a few doors for him that he could do that. And I think that's an added pressure for most of us in compliance, is that it's so many of the roles are niche that it's difficult to, I don't want to use the word escape, but I think it is probably the best word to use, that it is difficult to escape once you're stuck in that siloed position.
Yeah. And it's a challenge, right? Because I always say compliance is undervalued and underappreciated, because when we look at it holistically, when we look at it genuinely, I think the best problem solvers out there are in compliance. Compliance has to deal with the problems of compliance. The compliance often has to deal with the problems of things outside compliance. Finding solutions for commercial considerations now a lot more. I think the role of a compliance officer, head of compliance, MLRO, has evolved drastically over the last decade, where it's not just about telling people what they can't do.
Yeah.
It's actually finding solutions of actually what can you do within the framework then. And on top of that, interpreting regulation, which is often not clear, which is often evolving, changing daily, weekly, and the expectation of the business for us to be that more and more now. So
do you think that expectation has changed, or we're just more aware of it?
I think the expectations have evolved.
Okay.
I think they've changed. Me personally, I think you could get away with providing a analysis or providing some direction to your board of directors, your CEO, around what you can't do, and it stops there. But now, if what you can't do doesn't stop there, it's okay. What is the actual solution to that problem? Then, where are the grey areas we can maneuver in? And I think a lot more now that I work with some of the best problem solvers in my consultancy in the areas I operate in terms of different firms, different companies. I have some of the best problem solvers that are around. They're not only solving problems for compliance, like I'm saying, they're also solving problems for on the commercial side. Still being able to find solutions that can generate revenue within the constraints of compliance, better than acquisitions teams now, and like you're saying, commercial teams. And that leads me on to that kind of question that you kind of mentioned it a second ago around necessary evil. Previously, compliance was seen as a necessary evil because it was just a case of telling people what they can't and can do, or more so can't do. Do you still feel that compliance is seen as a necessary evil then? And does that, and then secondly, does that have an impact on the mental health aspect of a compliance professional?
I think it really varies from company to company in terms of the way that compliance is perceived, the way that it's portrayed to the wider business. I think it varies massively. We've worked with some companies, right, where the culture of compliance is amazing, where you can genuinely see from the owner, CEO, from all the way down to the very junior level staff. They understand what compliance is and why it's there. But then on the other side of the spectrum, we've seen companies where they don't actually care too much about compliance. They want to say they do because it ticks boxes. And I always say there's two companies, right? There's companies that want to be compliant and there's companies that want to appear to be compliant. There's nothing wrong with either or, okay? Because in some circumstances, you only have to appear to be compliant because the risks are very low in say a certain industry or a certain market or jurisdiction. So appearing to be compliant might be enough. Now, obviously, I always want to go for the compliant route, but you always work within the risk appetite of the business and what's the tools that you have around you. But I would say that overall, compliance, if I had to pick, is it a necessary evil or not? I would definitely say it's seen more as a necessary evil than it isn't in most companies. And I think it's the little things that get said, the small conversations that happen where CEOs, operational staff, directors, owners, they say little things where they don't realize the impact it's having. So for example, when they make a decision that, we're going to focus on acquisition this month, opposed to complying with that new rule that came in, because that acquisition project is going to bring us in, a couple of million, whereas that compliance project could lose us, money. And it's when they say these things publicly in front of the wider business, they're ingraining that message into the employees that it's more important for us to push forward with a money making project than it is to focus on a project that prevents us from losing money. I think that makes sense. Kind of like a double negative. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like they send these messages through their like micro comments that they say in meetings on a regular basis, and it gets ingrained in employees, and they don't realize it. So I think necessary evil is definitely lurking in most companies. I believe that one thing that is in the favor of compliance professionals is that, and I think the likes of you and me are testament to that the portrayal of compliance is changing. It's no longer suits and not in every environment, obviously, but it's no longer that compliance people are those formal guys that you've got to be scared of. They're the party poopers that are coming in to enforce rules. They're now, for what I'm seeing quite a lot, is they're now seeing them as approachable people, and that shift is really helping all the industries we're working with, and it's also helping to change it from the perception of being a necessary evil to being a necessary profitable function, because it is. At the end of the day, compliance is there for the business. It's not against the business, it's for the business. So again, I gave you another really long answer. Yeah. This is why I stopped writing the articles so much, because this is what happens when.
But again, like I said, this is what we have. We work quite closely together, and but it's not only yourself. I'm always having conversations, and these conversations are like this. They're fluid and they're really hard hitting, but we challenge each other in compliance in a way that I feel like compliance is again one of the business areas where we actually are comfortable in having the perception or the idea of actually maybe I'm wrong. I always go into something open-minded and actually question actually maybe I am wrong, whereas I think most people are trying to be right,
Yeah.
Whereas compliance, we're actually having to try to be wrong because that's the nature of
We're
compliance.
not as stubborn.
Yeah. Well, definitely not so much so in the recent past. I think again before a decade or so ago that was the case, and even going back to you saying having these more informal discussions that are still engaging, that still have takeouts and take homes, because again, a lot of the time, and one of the reasons why we did this podcast or we're doing this podcast is because we were having conversations, or we're going to conferences, or we're having these in boardrooms, and actually there wasn't no real takeaways from it. There wasn't real anything tangible. It was a lot of rhetoric, and so for us, I think this is why it's so important that we're doing this podcast. And then, like I said, that's why we even for those who are actually watching, will see us in a more casual wear, pair of jeans, trainers, and a shirt, because we wanted to get away from that rigid perception of compliance. And so I think you mentioned burnout before, and you mentioned kind of stresses or working. When I say burnout, you worked kind of being contactable 24 hours. I know you've held many senior roles and still hold senior roles in various industries and various roles that you do today. And talking of that, then have you experienced burnout, or have you observed burnout around your colleagues, and kind of what were the signs? Did you notice anything different?
I observed it in you. I observed it in you. And when you were, so obviously, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk, but when you were organising your wedding, like the formal wedding, the ceremony, you were also, and you might not have even recognised this, and you might tell me I'm way off, but at the time you were organising your wedding, which is one of the most stressful things you're ever going to do, right? Alongside that, you were going through audits. You were working with companies who were having audits, and you knew that a couple of those companies, or at least one of them, was failing. They were not doing well in that audit, and you were being contacted 24/7. Whilst you were, I remember having a conversation with you, and you were on the phone to the wedding planner, and you asked me to join in because it was like, it's too much. Like the guy's not getting where I'm coming from, and I joined that call with you, and I think you needed. I could see you as you were going into that call. You were so angry, which you don't normally get.
Yeah.
I very, very rarely see you angry, but you were really angry. You were getting so frustrated, and I don't think it was the wedding planning that was causing that, because I mean, it was definitely frustrating, but I think it was the added stresses, the added pressures that you were having from work at the same time, because your personal life is your escape from work, and your work is sometimes your escape from your personal life. But you literally had 24 hours a day for months, these situations that you had to handle, which were both really, high risk, right? If the wedding didn't go right, the consequences for that, I'm sure she would have killed you.
Yeah.
And I observed it in you that there's subtle things, like you went from being the most cool, calm, collected person I know to you were losing your temper a little bit more than you normally would, in the sense that you weren't going around hitting people, but I could see it in you that where you would normally just, be a bit more chilled, you were actually getting more frustrated with the people around you. Now they wouldn't know that, but I've known you for years, so I observed it. And that was quite painful to see, because you were trying to juggle so many things that were happening. And I think thankfully with like the help that you had from the friends and people around you, you managed to get a bit of a balance. So I observed it in you, and again, like that's, I suppose, coming to what people can look out for in terms of like observing things. That change in attitude, that change of temperament, I would say, is a sign. It's a sign that something is changing, something is different to the norm. So I observed it in you. In myself, yeah. Look, I mean, I'm one of the most up and down people that there can be. My highs are super high, and my lows can be very low. But thankfully, I don't get low too often. I'm quite a happy person. I see the good in things. But even from my perspective, I've seen it in myself where where everything's got on top of me. Everything's become too much, and the signs for me are I no longer I can tell them straight away. I've no longer got the motivation to go to the gym at 5 o'clock in the morning. I've no longer got the motivation to walk my dog for an hour or two. I'm more tempted to not so much anymore, but I was more tempted to want to have a drink in the evening.
It's the whiskey.
It's been a while, but yeah, that would still be my go-to. Whiskey and a bit of jazz music to settle the stress, settle the nerves. So I've definitely observed it, and I think, again, coming back to what we were saying right at the beginning, it's you. it starts with the mental dysfunction, right? There's stresses, there's pressures, and what compliance people do typically, and I'm one of these people as well, is that you kind of bury it and you just think that, well, I've got to carry on. And what happens is it just builds up. It builds up and builds up until you reach that breaking point. Like with any mental dysfunction, it eventually becomes an illness. And in compliance, we are, in my opinion, we're the worst group of people, because not because we're bad people, but because we're good people. We're the worst people at dealing with mental dysfunction, because we have to bury it, because, like we said at the beginning, there's so much at stake. And what we just need to get people to do is be aware of what the early signs are that, things are tough. And don't get me wrong, I'm very aware that some of the things that we're going to suggest to people or we're going to discuss are things that not everyone can do. But once you spot those signs, you need to take action as quickly as you can. Now, it's not always easy, and it's not always the right thing to do, because not always easy, and might not always be seen as the best thing to do, because you've got a job to do. But if you don't take action at the signs of the mental dysfunction, the problems, it's going to build up. And then when it reaches that breaking point, that's when it becomes a problem. So we just need to get people more aware of what the signs are, and taking action for themselves, and being more aware of the signs in your colleagues, so you could support your colleagues as well. That's another big thing, because again, coming back to your situation, what I observed is I think you broke out of it well because of the people around you. And I think that's what compliance people need to do. They work independently quite a lot, and I don't think that helps.
I definitely agree with that. And then it's actually funny, because only yesterday I was having a conversation, having a meeting with somebody who I work with within compliance, actually a deputy MLRO in one of the roles I'm managing at the moment. And I noticed that he came online at 6 a.m. But then we had a meeting at 5 p.m. Until 6. So I questioned him, and I said, I've noticed you came on at 6 a.m. in the morning, and it's now 5. Is there a reason why? And he was just like, yeah, I just woke up. I couldn't sleep, and I started working. I said, mate, listen, I need you, and I don't want you to experience some burnout in 1 or 2 months. So unless there's a reason why you need to sign on at 6 a.m., when you wake up, go do something in your personal time. Go for a run, go for a gym. That's what I like to do. Read a book, and then come online afterwards, or vice versa. Let me know that you've signed on early, and then I'll let you leave or finish early. Take some time for yourself, because I think this is where we have to recognize, actually, we are working long hours. We are having to constantly find solutions to problems, and with the influx of technology now, we're having not only to do it for ourselves, but rely on technology, which is not always our best friend. But it depends on the kind of the technological resource that you may have in not different operations. So what else then do you think that employers or leaders, as you are as well in the compliance space, can do to promote better mental health for compliance teams and colleagues?
I'm quite outspoken on these sort of things. One thing that I really don't like about companies, and I'll say the negative first, is this whole, we're doing mental health awareness week, one week a year. We're doing mental health awareness week. This week, we've got this speaker to come in and do this, and it's for 1 week of the year. And then the companies portray themselves as having a good culture of supporting their staff. That's not supporting your staff. Supporting your staff, and what employers could do more of and should do more of, is making it clear that it's okay to say that you're struggling. It's okay to come to us. Create a forum where it's okay for an employee to come to you and say, look, I'm struggling at home, at work. Things are tough at the minute. I need a day. I need a few hours to myself. I whatever it is, like, let them tell you what they need or what they want, and work with them. Because 9 times out of 10, when you ask people, what is it you want? What will help you to just, settle yourself, like to get back into a normal mindset, not normal, but a better mindset, a more harmonized mindset. They'll say they just need some time away from work. They need that switch off, because our jobs in compliance, they are 24/7, and you add it to the fact, like we said earlier, that it's difficult to find, and it can be difficult to find another job. So you've got that fear of unemployment if you don't do a good enough job. So the expectation of being available 24/7 means that you don't ever switch off. When you give employees the opportunity to talk to you and say that, I'm struggling, I need some support, and then you have that chat with them to say, well, what do you need? The outcome of sometimes even just having that chat with them is so good. But the problem is that I'm seeing more and more and more is that many HR departments, if you look at all the companies that we go to, how many of the employees that we speak to, they make a bit of a joke about the HR department. They're police. They're not supporting us. They're policing us. We see it time and time again. So employees no longer have HR. Like if you look back even 10 years ago, you could go and have a chat with HR. You could talk about many things. My wife's pregnant. I'm worried about my paternity pay. What can I do? And you'd have a good, honest conversation. Whereas now, people actually feel like they're scared of HR as opposed to supported by HR. They then have fear of their bosses in a lot of cases because, well, I don't want to show them that I'm weak, because that's what it's perceived as, right? It's a sign of weakness when you say you've got, stress, depression, whatever it is. It's seen as weakness from our own perspectives, not from the outside, but we see it as a weakness and we worry that other people will. So you've got to create that forum as a manager, as a colleague. You don't even have to be a leader, but just as a colleague, where your peers can come and chat to you. They've got to be able to speak to you. Maybe I'm being overconfident, but I believe that most of the people I work with, hopefully all of them, feel that they can speak to me. I would like to think that. Maybe they can't and I'm way off, but I'd like to think they can speak to me. Because on the flip side, I'm quite open with you and the guys I work with. If I need some time away, I need to switch off, I'll say, look, I'm going to watch my kids play. I've got sports day. I'm going to do this. Don't contact me. Unless the world is ending, don't contact me. And maybe it's maturity, maybe it's experience, but I've kind of got the balls to say that now, whereas in the past, I would never have said that. I'd never go to my colleagues and say, look, guys, don't contact me for a day because, I'm taking time off, because you didn't want to appear weak. You want to appear strong. Now I'll do it. No questions asked. If I feel that I need that break, I need to spend time with my family, or I need an extra, an hour or two in the gym or whatever it is, I'll do it. And I think companies have to create that culture where it's okay to speak. And I'm not seeing enough of it at the moment. In fact, I'm seeing it getting worse.
Would you say that's unique to compliance, though? Would you say that those challenges that you've mentioned are
No.
Okay.
That part's not unique to compliance. I think that's across most businesses, is that they don't feel that they can talk to their colleagues. I don't think that part is unique to compliance. I think the unique part to compliance, is all the other bits that we've touched on. Is that it's intensive, it's amplified in compliance. Yeah. And I think that's the problem, is that other departments, and not all of them. Listen, I know there's going to be people that work in different departments that can listen to this and go, well, hold on, you think compliance has got it all bad? What about us? Listen, I work with developers who work, crazy, ridiculous hours and are underpaid and don't get good leave. I know it's not just compliance, but the things we discussed early on, that burden of risk that sits on the shoulders of compliance, that fear of failure that you mentioned that sits on the shoulders of compliance, the fact that you are carrying the risk of your entire organization and the protection of the public sits on your shoulders. It means that everything is amplified. So the need to have platforms where you can speak to people is so much more important. It's invaluable. And I believe that if companies did create those cultures, did create those platforms for communication, we'd see the turnover decrease, because it's quite high at the moment. I think it was you that mentioned it, that we're seeing compliance teams churning through staff more than they used to. But I don't think it's because of underperformance. I think it's because they're burning staff out. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I do. Yeah, I do.
But what do you think what do you think the cause is, or what do you think companies could do? Because I've said from my perspective, what do you think could be different?
I don't think there's anything more than what you said. I think it's really just companies investing in that. So rather than just saying that they care for employees, showing that they care. I think with compliance, I think the impact of the stresses, like you said, are disproportionate because of the continuous scrutiny across multiple folds of gaze. So not just, like you say, not just from the business, but from external forces. So I think it's really for employees to look at the impact of the scrutiny and actually the impact of the responsibility of each team, and then proportionally providing support for those areas. So not so much a one size fits all.
But your teams, the teams that I see you working with always seem like they love their job. They always seem,
Yeah.
and maybe they're putting on a facade, but they always seem like they're content in their roles and everything's going well. So what is it that you do with your teams that you think is making it a bit more successful, or are they just really good liars?
No. So one couple of things I do is whenever I have a meeting, generally speaking, the first 5 minutes, even if it's a strategy call, even if it's a urgent critical call, I will try to start the first 5 minutes off with informal conversation, things that can lower the tension, things that can calm the mind. So if I'm having a weekly sync call, the first 10 minutes is nothing to do with work. It's how are you, how are your families, what have you been up to this weekend, what have you been up to this week. If it's a war room call, just again, let's focus, let's just calm the minds. Let's talk about scenarios which have been gone positive beforehand, and before we go into kind of that actually the challenge. So that's what I do. Again, we have something that was introduced in a few companies I've worked in. Is on a week, the whole compliance team will get together and we have our little coffee mornings, we call them.
Yeah.
Half an hour of just chitter chatter. It might be on your soapbox complaining about things. It might just be having a conversation about life, about our experiences. And again, this is something that I've seen work, and I try to install in every organization, every firm, every company that I frequent. Me myself personally, I think, and I'll ask you again, in terms of strategies for managing stress, I'm fortunate. I'm somebody of faith, so I make sure I start my day off with a prayer and a meditation, and that calms me, my spirit, and I'm able to kind of refocus each and every day. And then also, like I said, similar to you, I like to go to the gym, and that allows me to get those endorphins and again release stress in that way, manage my stress. I'm fortunate I've got a good family network, wife and children, who allow me to have different activities outside of work. Even my wife was about 2-3 months ago was saying to me, she's like, if you don't take a lunch break, it's a problem for me and you now. So forget your work. If you don't, I've seen you working for 10 hours.
She's seen you hungry.
If you don't take a lunch break, so she's almost like my clock now. So I've got those forces and those support network.
Why don't you take it upon yourself to know I've got to have a lunch break?
I'm somebody that I can't leave a job half done, if that makes sense. So I'm quite good in strategizing my day. I try to have a target of a task I will complete each day, and maybe that works in my favor and works against me. So if one of those tasks are kind of half done, I always feel like I have to finish that task, even if it takes me through to what I've prescribed as my lunch break. And then before you know it, it could be, you could be 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and you haven't eaten. I know it doesn't look that way, but it often is the case. And I think that's something that when we're working kind of from a working from home environment more, I think that's one way actually employers can support, is really encouraging employees actually to take breaks, not just when you're in the office, but also when you're at home. Look, we're not going to scrutinize you in the way that we're going to be micromanaging you because you're working from home. Because I think this actually studies released. I think the ONS National of Statistics released data. I think it was last week actually, and it was the first time that actually it was statistics showing that people working from home were actually more productive than people working in an office. So I think there's a whole 360, whereas before people used to think actually if you work from home you're less productive, but actually statistics are show otherwise now.
The problem with those statistics is there's so many of them, like so many different data sets, that companies will choose which ones they want to use in their favor. So that one's a really good one. So if you're an employee, you're going to say, well, look at this data. But then you get owners, CEOs, etc., that will say, well, I've got this data that says, people that are in the office 5 days a week are more productive. But let's look at it from because the whole hybrid working, which is a silly thing. There shouldn't even be discussions around it anymore. Were you happier? Were you more relaxed when you were able to work from home more, or do you find the hybrid model like a bit of both, or do you find going to the office is better for you? Because some people do prefer it, right? Some people say that going into the office is for them so much better for them, not just their health, but not just mental health, but health in general, like having conversations and stuff. When were you? What do you prefer, and when were you feeling happier?
I think for me personally, I prefer to work from home more than working from the office for a number of reasons. One of the roles I do as a global head of AML, I'm managing multiple offices across the world. So having to go to the office stops and restricts me being able to interact with colleagues in different time zones from early. So I know it may not be good, but sometimes I'll get up, have my first meeting at 6:30, where somewhere else is 9:30 in the morning, then we can interact. Then I might take a bit of time for myself. I might go to the gym for an hour, come back. Whereas if I'm in the office now, I can't do that. I'm kind of restricted in terms of I have to get up, go to the office, and that whole day is the office day. And then I've got to come back and think about actually that kind of being able to switch off and do things. So me personally, I prefer working from home. I'm fortunate I've got a setup where I've got multiple screens. I've got a setup which allows me to function at the optimum level of productivity. And I think the focus should be on maximizing productivity. So wherever you work, where you're most productive is where you should be working, rather than just coming to the office because we have an office space. So I think there should be an assessment of actually where do you work most productively, and if the business wants to do that analysis, then great. Let's analyze actually where is this person most productive. We can track that, and if it is at the office, then it can be the office. If it's at home, then actually, let them work from like you're somebody who I appreciate and I recognize focusing on actually productivity and getting jobs done. I've heard you say before, look, I don't mind, if you guys take a 2 hours break, as long as you get the work done. And because we're working compliance, we are held to deadlines and targets which are hard. There's not like, oh, you got to release this project or this advertising campaign, and if you miss it, well, you just missed the campaign. If you miss implementing a control or procedure in line with regulation on a given date, then you're failing to comply with the regulation. They're not going to move it a day or two, a week or two because of you. And so I think that's where we have the luxury of actually being able to measure productivity and measure actually output a lot better than other business areas. So what about you then? What kind of, I know you mentioned a few in terms of going to the gym and stuff. What kind of strategies do you use then to manage your stress levels and things like that?
Yeah, I think now we're coming to the end of this session. I think it's good to leave with some tips, some pointers and some like final observations. So what I would say is, like, first of all, I would say that, going back to the beginning of the talk, that, my feeling that compliance is quite a selfless role. I think it's also, when it comes to your mental health, and we'll talk about it within compliance, we'll talk about it in broader terms, but there is some bravery that comes with it. And I mentioned this to you before, right? That fear's one side of the spectrum. On the other side, it takes bravery. Now, I'm not hinting for 1 second that people that don't speak about their mental health are cowards or are giving into their fear. But what I'm saying is, it does take a different type of bravery to be able to speak and confront your challenges, your mental health challenges. Because if you look at compliance perspective, and let me put it this way to you: if I said to you right now, there's a gun being pointed at a member of your family, would you jump in front of that bullet without a second's thought? Would you?
It depends which member of the family it is. They are most likely the answer yes.
You would, yeah. If it was immediate family, or even a friend, would you jump? You would.
Yeah.
But if a gun was pointing at you and I said, you got to take this bullet, you're a little bit more hesitant. And I think it's the same with mental health, is that, like, when you see things in your friends and your colleagues, you care more about them, your friends, your family, than you do about yourself. And what we need to do is that the two things I would say, the two pieces of advice, one's for self and one's for others. The one for yourself is, do a bit more research, a bit more reading into what the signs are. I'm not an expert. I'm not a clinical expert, and I won't portray to be. I'm only going to talk about things that have impacted me or that I've observed.
Sure.
So what I would say is, do a bit more reading and research into what are the signs, the early signs that there's a bit of mental dysfunction. And then what I would say is, then it's on you to think of what do I know works for me to bring me happiness, to bring me more joy in life, in my job, and take action. Put things in place to allow you to take action. And then the second part comes to others. We've all got to be more aware of our colleagues, our friends, our family, but in this case, we'll talk about colleagues and we'll talk about our compliance professionals. Whether it's somebody who's working on trading compliance, somebody who's working on safer gambling, somebody in anti-money laundering, somebody that's a chief compliance officer. we can't be so blasé about the fact that we know you're overworked, we know you're stressed, we know that you're struggling at the minute, and not chat to them, not just have a chat to them and just say, what's going on? Let's go for a coffee. Let's talk about things, and giving them support. And I think that's the two sides of it. We've got to look after ourselves, and then we've got to start looking after our colleagues as if they were friends and family, because we spend more time with them than our friends and family. So those were the two pieces of advice that I would like to leave from my perspective this session with, is hopefully that's something that people take away and they action it. I would love nothing more than people feedback on this podcast and say, you know, I've started having coffees with more of my colleagues, and we started having a chat more, and you know, we've seen changes. That for me, that'll be a win.
Yeah, and I know this is a genuine desire and passion of yours, and I know you're working in the background. I won't steal your thunder, but I know you're working in the background on some initiatives around compliance and around mental health, and I think you're right. I think the thing we have in compliance, which I want to state, and which we're fortunate for, is that it's based on trust, it's based on integrity. So we're able to have a bit more trust, and there's a bit more integrity. And I'm not saying there's no integrity in other areas of the business, but we have that trust element. And I think we should utilize that for our advantage and speak to our colleagues and speak to those we work with, because there is a lot of trust in compliance. And I think we should utilize that to actually be able to then have those more difficult conversations, where we're overworked and overwhelmed. And that's something, again, I've seen, even we're coming to the end of the year now, and in different businesses I'm supporting, working with, it's the compliance teams that have issues with actually fulfilling their annual leave. So we come to the end of the year now, you know, compliance officers or junior compliance officers, AML professionals are, you know, having 10 days or 15 days of having to take off between now and the end of the year. So I think even that is something that I do more often now, is I track leave throughout the year. So rather than saying not taking leave, I'm looking at people who I potentially may manage and say, look, we're now in half of the year, and you've only used up 10% of your leave for the year. What's happening? What's your plan for the year? Is it because you think that's good? You can't take leave because you're overworked? No, if it's not, we'll figure it out. You know, plan your holiday, plan some time away with your family or for yourself. I forced a member of the team to take a week off, and she just literally just took a week off and kind of got on with like chores and stuff, and she came back the week afterwards, and she looked super refreshed, and I feel that's something I think in compliance we can do, not even just compliance, but just as a general, but specifically in compliance, because we work to deadlines, we work to things which are constantly updating and changing. It feels like there's a never-ending deadline in compliance often. So I think that would be something we could do, is track yourself and track others in terms of time away from the business. Yeah.
I think that's a good way to end it, is like the focus for everybody that's listened to this is look after yourself and look out for others. Like if it's the key thing, right? Don't make it just about your own mental health, the mental health of your colleagues and your friends. I think that's a good way to wrap it up. I think a little bit of advice to people to close off until the next podcast. So this is our first podcast, so trying to wrap it up is like a weird one. Like I'm kind of waiting on you, but like thank you to everyone who's listened, who's watched it. For those of you that watched it, this is going to be a regular thing. The next podcast, I don't know if there's going to be a guest on the next one. I think it's the one after.
Yeah. So again, this is a new podcast, and it's something we've been discussing. So what we want to do is we want to engage with other key professionals, key experts in the compliance space, but we also want to keep the value of ourselves, having conversations, and also engage you, the listener. So what we're looking to do is have, you know, guests, as well as kind of interactive sessions where we're taking questions from that people have sent through to us through our website, or through email, or through any contact, social media, where we can then answer those questions in some of our podcasts. So we'll have our own topics, but we're also looking to hear questions which we can dive into and unpack. And like I said, this is one of the main reasons why we're doing a podcast, because we want to really unpack and challenge each other, have conversations, and most importantly, get outcomes that we can take away and use from that. So,
but listen, thank you guys for listening, for watching to Compliance Chronicles. More to come. We appreciate your feedback, and we'll see you again soon.
It's been a pleasure, Alex, as always. Thanks, guys.